Good afternoon. I want to thank you all for being here today. But before I begin my other remarks, I want to say a special thank you to everybody here. Last year we had a very, very difficult budget year, and it wasn't just me and it wasn't just President's Cabinet, but it was every budget manager and every employee that was affected had some part in dealing with that, the budget difficulties that we've had, and it's been you all that have made it work, and I want you to know how deeply I appreciate your efforts to get us where we are today with as little damage to our institution as possible given the budget reductions. You know, last year when we had this same kind of meeting, it was in March. And that was my intention again this year, but the reason I delayed it a little is because I kept thinking that we would have a clearer picture of where we are in terms of the budget by March. Well, we didn't. And as late as last Wednesday evening, I and some others had dinner with the President Pro Tem of the Senate and the Senate leadership, and again, trying to get some more direction about where we are in terms of the budget. And it still is very unclear about where we are, but I thought if I delay it any longer, I might as well just wait till they pass the budget in May and then talk then. But I wanted to share with you what I know now, and I don't know as much as I had hoped by this time in the legislative cycle. But I am going to talk with you today about what I do know and also some reasonable beliefs that I have about where we are. But before we talk about next year, I would like to revisit with you how we've gotten to where we are today. For those of you who are new employees, you may not remember this, but those of you who've been here for 3 or 4 years will remember. In fiscal year 15, which began July 1, 2014, the governor proposed a 3.5% cut to higher education. And that worked its way through the legislative process, through the appropriations process. And on the last afternoon of the last day of the legislative session, we were able to remove that cut from the higher ed appropriation. And as a result of that work, we had a flat budget. That is, higher ed did not get an increase, but higher ed did not get a decrease. And when I say we, I mean it was a group of higher ed people, including myself, but certainly not only me, and we worked it very hard. And I've said earlier this morning when I gave this presentation, there's an old saying that it's better never to watch either sausage or law being made, because sometimes it's not very pretty, and that was certainly one of those days. It was very stressful and very heated and argumentative, but we were able to succeed in at least removing the cut that was in the bill. So then we came to the next year, fiscal year 2016, which began July 1, 2015. That was the one day before I became president of Oklahoma City Community College. And that budget contained a 3.5% reduction to higher education. Well, that was bad enough, but I also was out there at the end of that session, and we were asked by the chancellor to encourage the legislators to pass a bill that cut higher education 3.5%. And I talked to several legislators, and I said, I feel very strange about asking you to vote for a bill that actually cuts higher ed's budget. I've never done it in my life before. But the reason that we did is because we were either going to get cut under one version of the budget, we were going to get cut 3.5%, and under the other version, we were going to be cut 6%. So it was kind of a lesser of the two evils approach, and we did get the 3.5% reduction. As I say, that was bad enough, but then in December of 2015, there was a general revenue failure, and Oklahoma City Community College lost another $497,000. And many of you know what a revenue failure is, but for those that may not, the legislature appropriates a certain amount of money to each of the agencies, including the state regents, and then they allocate to the individual colleges and universities. At times, the revenue that's anticipated doesn't come in the amount anticipated. So even though there has been an appropriation made, the governor or the finance director can declare a revenue failure, and the amount sent to the agencies is actually reduced by the amount of the failure. So our part of that first general revenue failure in December 2015 was almost $500,000, $497,000. And then in February 16, just a few months later, there was an oil revenue failure in the amount of $834,000, just a massive failure. But in March of 2016, there was another general revenue failure of $875,000. In April, there was an oil revenue failure of $142,000. And in June of 16, there was another oil revenue failure of almost $70,000. And when I say oil revenue, it's the money we get from the gross production tax. So for the entire fiscal year, we had a reduction of $2.4 million over the previous year's budget. And that is not 3.5%, that was 10%. As you recall, during that fiscal year, or as you may recall, we took prompt and proactive action to reduce primarily non-personnel costs. It was very important to me, and it was very important to the President's Cabinet that we do everything that we could to try to avoid mid-year layoffs that had occurred at some of the other institutions around the state, and we were able to do that. So we slashed non-personnel budgets by a great deal. We were much more conservative and frugal. Not that we had been wasteful before, because we had not, but we tightened our belt, so to speak, and we were able to deal with really devastating cuts of $2.4 million without anybody getting laid off mid-year, without any closing of programs or ceasing of services. Well, that was bad enough, but then this year that we're in now, fiscal year 17, which began July 1st of last year, the legislature reduced the appropriation to higher education by another 16%. Now, that is devastating, particularly coming on the heels of a flat budget and then in effect, a 10% cut. The more precise amount was 15.95%, but I've rounded it to 16. Well, what did we do in response to that massive additional cut? We made some additional non-personnel expense reductions. We reduced our staffing plan. We reduced the positions in our staffing plan. We reduced this year about 64 positions fewer in the staffing plan than we had last year. Of those 64 positions, 28 of them had incumbent members of our staff in them. They were filled positions. And to be fair, some of the others were part-time positions. Some of them had positions in the staffing plan that had not been funded. Others had other positions in the staffing plan that we eliminated were positions that had been vacant for a number of years, and there was no real intent to fill them over those years. But we had 28 positions filled with good employees of Oklahoma City Community College, and every one of those positions was eliminated. So what we did is we were able to, through a lot of hard work by so many people, we were able to find other positions for 21 of those 28 people. And we moved them to positions and were able to preserve their employment here at the college. We didn't make new positions for anyone. We didn't transfer people to positions for which they were not qualified and couldn't do the work, but we transferred people to other positions that were that fit their skill set and their experience. Well, how about the 7 people that didn't take those positions? One person declined a transfer even though the position to which they were being offered a transfer was actually at a higher salary than their current position. But they declined that transfer and therefore left employment with the college. 2 other people retired. They were vested and they chose to retire. There were 4 people left who were employees at this institution who wanted to stay here and for which we could not find another suitable position, and those 4 employees lost their job. So if you take starting with 64 positions that are removed from the staffing plan and you end up with 4, I believe, and I think most people would say that we did everything we could, and that's a pretty good record. But you know, I have lost a job before. And if you're one of those 4, we didn't do a very good job. If you're one of the 4 that didn't keep their job, they're unemployed, and they don't think we did a very good job, perhaps. But that's what we did in terms of personnel for this year. We also increased, there was a modest increase in tuition, and there was a new fee added that helped us financially. We decreased our carryover. Carryover is the amount of money that we have left over at the end of the year that went unspent, even though it was budgeted, and hopefully we'll always have carryover, although it's getting much more difficult. And we decreased our carryover by $500,000, by $500,000. During this time, a difficult decision, one of the most difficult that I've made since I've been at the college in either this position or any other, there's a more than 30-year tradition of a community valued and a community supporting activity called the Arts Festival Oklahoma. We had an arts festival over the Labor Day weekend for well over 30 years, and we discontinued the arts festival because we had to save money, and we lost a substantial amount of money on the festival. The arts festival was important to the community, but we really had to focus on the core mission of the institution. During this time of what I consider really draconian cuts to our personnel and to our expenditures, I am pleased to say that we had 18 vacant faculty positions, and we were able to refill 17 of those 18 vacant faculty positions. Well, that is in a capsule what we did in reaction to this 16% cut. Early in this fiscal year, we were informed that actually in the previous few months of the previous fiscal year, actually more cut was made than necessary, and there is a process that's called a budget reallocation. And as a result of that, we received $528,000, which was money that was cut than was necessary. So we received that over $500,000, and it was certainly welcome. You can imagine that when we received that, I received a large number of suggestions about how we would spend that money. The most recurring suggestion was a stipend for faculty and staff, which I desperately would like to give. But because of my concern that we were going to be in another mid-year adjustment, that's what those reductions during the course of the year are called. They're called mid-year adjustments. And because of the cuts that we made this fiscal year, we don't have any cushion left. We don't have 64 positions to give up. We don't have, between $500,000 and $1 million of non-personnel costs that we can give up again. We've already done that. So I was very concerned if we had another mid-year adjustment. What would happen if it was substantial is that we would be required to have layoffs of personnel during the school year or during the fiscal year. And certainly that is the last thing that I want to do, is to tell someone during the contract period, sorry, we can't keep you because we're out of money. So I resisted the attempts to spend that $528,000 because I was so concerned that we would have a mid-year adjustment, and we set that money aside to be used to mitigate the impact of another mid-year adjustment. Well, in March of this year, just last month, guess what? We had a mid-year adjustment of $133,000. And so rather than scramble around and talk about who we're going to have to lay off, we just tapped that fund and we used that $528,000 to offset the $133,000 in the mid-year adjustment. During the Board of Equalization meeting in February, I attended that meeting at the state capitol, and the state finance director, Preston Dorflinger, he's also Governor Fallon's chief budget negotiator, he indicated that he believed that we would have a mid-year, well, that's when that mid-year adjustment was announced for March, and he indicated the possibility, and perhaps the way he said it was the likelihood, but he said perhaps, of other mid-year adjustments. Well, what's happened since February is we've already had a mid-year adjustment of $133,000, but it has not directly adversely affected us because we still have that $528,000, and now we have about $397,000 or so left in that account. But what's happened since then is the state of Oklahoma has a rainy day fund, and it's kind of an emergency fund for when collections are down. It's raining literally and figuratively today. And Preston Dorflinger has borrowed over $300 million just a few weeks ago, borrowed over $300 million from the rainy day fund to use to fund state agencies' allocations because revenue is coming in slower than expected. There is some legitimate legal question about whether he had the legal and constitutional authority to, quote, borrow that money from the rainy day fund. He, without question, has money. He can, quote, borrow money from other state accounts, but the rainy day fund is a constitutional account. It was set up by a vote of the people with a constitutional amendment. Attorney General Mike Hunter has received the question about was it legal or not, and as I mentioned this morning, I had lunch last week with Attorney General Hunter, and he didn't say anything about that, and I understood that I shouldn't ask, so I didn't, but I expect we'll be receiving an opinion of the Attorney General about the legality of that transfer. But by the time anything is done about the transfer, we'll be at the end of the fiscal year. And so here's where we are now. Not only does current revenue that's coming in for the months of April, I think our April revenue will be announced May 10th. Not only do we have to have enough revenue to fund we use April money to fund May. That's the way it works. Not only do we have to have enough money coming in April to fund what had already been appropriated for May, we have to make up this $300 million that's been borrowed, because according to the Oklahoma Constitution, that money must be paid back by June 30. It can't go across fiscal year boundaries. So between now and the end of June, the state not only has to bring in enough money to fund government in the amounts appropriated, but enough money has to come in to recover that $300 million. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know how much revenue is going to be received, but basically the April tax revenues that are received fund May allocations fund June, and then June is the cash flow for the new fiscal year for July. But what I can say is this: I am very, very concerned, very worried that the revenue coming in the rest of the fiscal year will not be sufficient to both fund the appropriations that have already been made, and in addition to that, make up that $300 million that's been borrowed. Whether there was authority for it or not, it has to be, that rainy day fund has to be replenished. So I am very concerned about another mid-year adjustment, a general revenue mid-year adjustment. My hope is that if we have one, that approximately $397,000 that remains in that original budget reallocation amount of 528 will be enough to offset whatever mid-year adjustment is made. There is additional speculation that there may be another mid-year adjustment coming from the oil revenue side. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't. It would be speculation on my part, but I can tell you that state officials are quite concerned that that's going to happen. So, what I can tell you is this: number one, I think it has been proven prudent that we didn't spend that $528,000 when we got it, because it's already helped us out. And I am very concerned that we're going to need the rest of it to get us through the end of the fiscal year without layoffs, and let's all hope that happens. So it's, I can say, last year with 5 revenue failures, I've been associated in one capacity or another with Oklahoma City Community College since 1974. And I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen a year in all my experience in government and in higher ed where we had 5 revenue failures in a year. But it happened last year, and we've certainly suffered for it this year. But now let's talk. I mean, we came really to talk about this coming year. Where are we? And I wanted to tell you what I know. And by the way, at the end of my remarks, I'll be glad to take any questions you have about anything I've said or anything you want to know that maybe I haven't said. Where are we as far as next fiscal year? And fiscal year 18 begins July 1, just a few months away. And here we go again. Well, back in December of last year, I asked Dr. John Boyd, the Chief Financial Officer, to prepare me what Dr. Boyd and I refer to as what-if budgets. What if we get cut X percent? What if we get cut Y percent? Or what if we have increases? So I talked to John, and I asked him in December to create me 2 what-if budgets. And one of those what-if budgets was, what if we get cut 5%? And the other was, what if we get cut 10%? And the reason that I asked for those 2 budgets is because although I don't have a crystal ball, I do have some experience and some common sense, and I thought it was almost certain that we were going to get a revenue reduction again for next fiscal year. And as John and I talked, and I think John agreed with me, there was no reasonable expectation that I had, at least, that that reduction would be less than 5%. So I asked for the 5% budget. Likewise, at that time in December, I really thought that 10% would be the high side, that our reduction would not be more than 10%. So I asked for a what-if budget of 10%, and John provided those. Well, when I went to the board meeting, the Board of Equalization meeting in February at the Capitol, I discovered how wrong I was, because the state revenue that's been certified for expenditure for next fiscal year beginning July 1, 2017, which is fiscal year 2018, the available revenue for appropriation is $878 million less than this year. Now, that's after last year we had $1.3 billion less. So what that means is that we have 14.5% less revenue that's been certified for appropriation for fiscal year 18. So what that told me is that my 5% what-if budget was way too low, as was my 10% what-if budget. So what I think, and this is my judgment, it's not a fact, but it's what I think to be my best estimate at this time, is that we will receive a 14% cut on the low side and maybe a 17% cut on the high side. For purposes of planning meetings with our Board of Regents, and we generally go to the board in May, not with final figures, because the legislature usually is still in session by the time we have our board meeting, but we try to give the Board of Regents an idea of where we are. And right now, John and I are using the 14% benchmark as a planning number, at least, about where we will be. Now, again, the $878 million is actually 14.5% less. Well, and I must tell you that that number presupposes that the legislature will reduce higher education's appropriations in an equal amount as to the reductions in state revenue. You all know that in the past 2 years we've received, especially last year, we have received a much higher reduction in appropriations than have other agencies. We've been hit especially hard. So there is no guarantee that even though the state has a 14.5% reduction in revenue, that we are only going to be reduced 14.5%. Now, we could be reduced less, but we could also be reduced more, and the legislature has proven that over the last few years. So here's what a 14% reduction in revenue will mean to us for fiscal 18. If it's at 14%, that's it's 2.8 million. It's almost 2.9 million, 2,891,000. That's a huge amount considering we just took out millions out of our budget last year. And if the reduction in appropriation to higher ed is 17%, then that reduction to OCCC will be $3.5 million. Those are both extremely devastating numbers, and they're made more so because of something I said earlier, but I think it's worth repeating. We don't have any more cushion. We took out all the cushion last year, trying to save jobs and preserve programs and to keep our operations as normal as possible. So I believe what that means is that the reductions this year are going to be more painful than the reductions last year. Well, how can we reduce expenses? We will revisit the non-personnel expenses, supplies, travel, equipment, software contracts, service contracts of all kinds. And we will certainly revisit those and make more reductions if it's in the best interest of the college. But I will tell you, we cut to the bone last year with those non-personnel costs. So I don't want to mislead you and make you believe that we can make up these $2.9 million or $3.5 million from our non-personnel costs. We cannot. Then we have personnel. Well, how can we reduce personnel costs? Well, there's several different ways. First, something I anticipate we will do, we will not fill every vacant position. It doesn't mean we won't fill any, but we will not fill some vacant positions. And this year, unlike last year, I anticipate that both faculty and staff positions will be involved in not refilling some of those positions. The other thing, and it's the most painful thing for me, the most difficult, is that we may have some additional position eliminations. The other part of personnel costs are benefits. And I will say to you that Oklahoma City Community College has, and for many years has, we spend about 75 cents of every dollar on personnel. That's not a bad thing, that's a good thing, because that's the way we deliver our services. So we will not be able to reduce our expenditures without reducing personnel costs to some extent. So another way we can do that is we can reduce benefits. The college share of the 403B, the college share of, the college pays the employee share of teacher retirement. That's not required by law. Many places don't get that. And also some health insurance and other benefits. We could do that. I'm not saying we will, but we could. Another way we can reduce costs this coming year is the elimination of programs. And if we eliminate programs, that will result in both personnel and non-personnel reductions in expenditures. Another way we can reduce expenditures next year is to reduce or eliminate some services that we currently perform for the institution, for students, staff, faculty, whatever. And if we eliminate services of some kind, we will probably eliminate both personnel positions and non-personnel costs. And I will tell you in the question and answer session that follows, I will talk to you about these categories, but I won't talk. I certainly it would be totally inappropriate for me to talk about any particular position, and even any program. I'm not going to talk about the particulars. And here's the reason. First of all, if we're going to eliminate a position, we're not going to announce it in an open meeting. We're going to be talking to individual employees in private. But moreover, no decision has been made about the elimination of any program, any service, any position, any benefit, or any vacancy. I can tell you, because I would know, there's been no decision made about any of those things, but we are now in the time of year where we will be talking about those, and we will be working on those a great deal between now and the end of May. As he did last year, Steve Bloomberg is going to lead several listening sessions for all employees of the college who wish to participate, not required, totally voluntary. But if you would like to attend one of those two sessions and talk about any cost-saving measures that you want to recommend be considered, or certainly if you have any revenue-raising measures that you think we ought to look at, that will be welcome. Those listening sessions, and I believe Steve sent out an email this morning, an all-employee email. On Thursday, April 20th, CU 1 and 2, there'll be a session at 10 a.m. and another session at 2 p.m. Dr. Boyd provided me a document late yesterday afternoon that indicated that if we receive a 14% cut in funding this year from FY15 to FY18, that will be almost a 31% reduction in our state appropriations over that period of time. It is a monumental problem for us. But I want everyone here to know that over the last several years, we have diligently tried. When I say we, not just me, but President's Cabinet, budget managers, and others, we have diligently attempted to try to mitigate the impact of these cuts. We worked very, very hard last year not to have layoffs mid-year, and we were successful. We did everything we could to try to offer individuals, employees whose positions were being eliminated, other positions in the college, and I think we did as good a job as that as humanly possible. We took extraordinary efforts to reduce non-personnel costs, and we tried to do all of that in the context of being compassionate to people and recognizing our commitment to our students and our employees. I want you to know that we will continue to do everything we can to mitigate the impact of this budget reduction from the state of Oklahoma. But in the end, I have the responsibility to present to the Board of Regents a budget that allows the institution to continue to function, and to the extent that is possible, is consistent with accomplishment of the mission of OCCC, and that's what I will do. Over the next 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, some of the decisions that are made will become known to you. They won't be hidden from you at all. And when you read them or hear of them, I think there will be substantial criticism of the decisions. And I want you to know that your criticism will be well-founded, because we do not have a choice between good decisions or good choices on the one hand and bad choices on the other hand. They're all bad. And so whatever decisions are made will be open to criticism, and you won't be wrong. It will be a bad choice. But what we're going to do is to try to make the choices that fundamentally preserve the core mission of the college and do everything we can to preserve the integrity of our employee base and our services to our students. And while I understand there will be criticism, and I would be the last person to say don't criticize a decision, particularly if I've made it. In that context, what I would ask for you to consider is that we really are all in this together. These times are going to affect faculty and staff and students. It's not faculty against staff. It's not any of us against students and the services that we provide. I sincerely hope that you won't think of it as us against them, whether them is faculty or staff or the administration. We all are in this together, and we're all going to get through it together. But it is going to be a challenge, which we are up to, and we will survive and prosper in the future. Later in the year, it'll be in the fall, I plan to present to the campus community a blueprint for where I think we need to go as an institution, because I see no reason for optimism in terms of the state of Oklahoma in the foreseeable future, in the near future, of providing substantial new monies for higher education. I just don't see it for the next few years at the very least, and we can't wait. OCCC has always been a creative, innovative, forward-thinking, cutting-edge, try new things institution. That is why we are considered a flagship community college in Oklahoma, and we have to maintain that edge. We cannot allow ourselves to slip into mediocrity because of these financial problems, and we're not going to do that. But it's going to take all of us working together, and it's going to take lots of understanding and maybe doing things in a little bit different way. You know, we're all here, in the end, we're all here to serve our students and accomplish the mission of the college. But the way we do that is through employees. It's through all of us. And that's what makes this situation to me so challenging and so uncomfortable, because, yes, we have to preserve the core mission. The board is going to expect us to do that. Well, how do you do that? You do it with employees, because we don't produce a product. We produce a service for our students. So we're going to do everything humanly possible to continue providing the services that this college is known for and meeting the needs of our students in our community, but it has to be through our employees. And I want you to know I recognize that. So before I take questions, I want to say again, thank you for what you did last year to help us get through the crisis then. Thank you for all of your efforts to try to mitigate the effects of the budget cuts this year. And thank you in advance for what I know that you will do next year to try to make the best of this very difficult situation. Thanks for being here, and we have a couple of microphones. I'll be happy to take your questions if you have any. John, got a mic coming your way.
I was hoping that I could get Travis to run across the theater, but I guess not. What percentage of our total E&G budget comes from the state?
Well, in the past, it's been about 35%, but that's dropping.
My other question is, are all considerations on the table? In other words, any ideas will be looked at as possible solutions to the problem? Specifically, I'm talking about the possibility of what some other state agencies have done, which are furlough days.
Could everybody hear John's question? Okay. John, the answer is yes. Last year, all the suggestions that were made, we didn't take all the suggestions, but we discussed each one of them. And I'm really kind of glad you brought up furloughs, because some other institutions did that. That is an option that we will look at. A furlough is a day off work for employees. But here's the deal. You don't get paid. So to me, a furlough is a pay cut. It's a reduction in salary. Is it an option? It surely is. But we have to realize that we're saying to all employees, you have to take a pay cut. You know, we haven't had a salary increase in years. Now, we had a stipend that was annualized a few years back, I think. But not only would we not be giving a salary increase, we would be decreasing salaries to the extent we furloughed employees. But sure, that was considered. I strongly thought about that last year, and it will be considered again this year. Are there other questions? Yes.
Hello. Talking about all options on the table, I've heard some rumors, I know how you feel about rumors going around, of the possibility of switching over to all adjunct positions. Is that option also on the table?
First of all, Derek, I've lived a long time. Rumors will always be with us, so I don't worry about them. But I have never once considered doing away with all of our full-time faculty and just going to adjuncts. So the answer is, I mean, when I say everything's on the table, if you make that suggestion, absolutely, we're going to discuss it, but I can tell you I've never even considered going to all adjuncts. Anybody else? Yes. Right down here in front, Travis.
With building the VPAC, we have so many opportunities for artists, and like a couple weeks ago we had John Lithgow coming. What percentage, is there any money that comes from having the VPAC that contributes to the budget?
Great question. If you couldn't hear, we have the Visual and Performing Arts Center, the theater, I mean part of that. Do we get any revenue from that? And the answer, Lemuel Bartigas could answer that better than I could, but Lemuel, I'm not asking you to, but we do get significant revenue from the theater. The theater has exceeded every expectation that we had when we built it for revenue. It's more in demand than we thought it would be. As you know, we use the theater a lot for college use, i.e. this meeting, but the theater has brought in significant revenue. The flip side of that is it costs a lot of money to run the theater too. Can you imagine heat and cooling this place? So, but the revenue, I've been very pleased with the revenue stream from the theater since the day it opened, and I don't see any reason why that's going to significantly change. I'll tell you another thing about the theater. One of the things that I haven't talked about today, but I will talk to you about it in the fall, is we are going to ramp up in a way we've never done before our private giving, private donors, and the foundation donors. And the way the larger universities do that is they use their athletic teams to, if you will, wine and dine wealthy donors because they take them to football games and that sort of thing. Well, we don't have any competitive athletics. So in terms of fundraising, this theater is my football team because donors like the theater, they like to come here, and I frequently host dinner before a theater performance, and I bring prospective donors and donors to the theater. And just this morning, I had breakfast in the Oklahoma room with a prospective donor. Unfortunately, he didn't write a check, but we'll be talking to him some more. So the theater is going to be, not going to be, it already is a significant part of that fundraising program that's not necessarily connected to a program here in the theater, but it's something that donors like. But Lemuel Bartigas and his staff, Chuck's over here, they have done an unbelievably good job at managing this theater and maximizing its income. Yes? Okay. You want to ask me and I'll try to repeat it? Her question was really twofold. One is there anything we can do to add more events or increase theater revenue or even more than we have? We're certainly trying to do that every day, and I anticipate that Lemuel and Chuck and the staff will be successful in that as the theater becomes even more well-known. Her second question related to the call center at OU, where they use students to call, I think it's primarily alumni because I get calls all the time from them. They use students to call primarily alumni seeking donations to the university. That is actually a part of my long-term plan for fundraising, is to create a center similar to that. And I doubt if we're going to ask students to volunteer. We're going to pay them to do that. I was in the I think they call it Northern New Mexico Community College in Albuquerque last year, and I saw their student call center. We've never had one, but I don't think there's any reason we shouldn't. Now you also understand we don't have the financial base of OU, of course. But I get a call, and they talk to me as an alumni of the law school there, because they always say, you graduated from OU in law school, and we're trying to raise money for a law professorship or something like that. So, but that idea is an excellent one. We are going to pursue it. We had already planned to pursue that. We're making some changes in our institutional advancement office now that I think will bear fruit later on in the next fiscal year.
President Stewart, we have one more question.
Okay.
You've spoken a little bit already about ways to increase revenue. Is there any possibility that things like tuition increases and added fees could be on the table also?
Yeah. Additional tuition increases and fees are without question on the table. I will say, in addition to that, the way tuition or fee increases occur is that I have to recommend them to the Board of Regents, so I have to agree with them. And then the Oklahoma City Community College Board of Regents has to vote to approve a request to the state regents, so the OCCC Board of Regents has to agree. And then that request goes to the state regents, and the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education have to agree. I mean, they vote on it. So fee increases or mandatory fee increases and tuition increases are not automatic. Every year we get some non-binding, not legally binding guidance from the chancellor as to the mood of the state regents about what kind of fee increase they will consider if it can be justified. So we don't have free rein just to go request anything we want. Well, we have free rein to request anything we want, but I have to agree with it. Our regents have to agree, and then the state regents. In addition to that, I am very sensitive to the cost of higher education. Our students are, particularly those who don't get Pell or some other form of aid, are struggling, and there's just some realistic limits to how much tuition I think we ought to charge. There's also some legislative limits, although we are not even close to those. And what I would prefer to do, instead of raise tuition, is have more students. So recruitment, which all of you can be involved in, I don't care if you're faculty or staff, recruitment will be a central part of our way forward, because we have, tuition and fees are a major source of our revenue. So it's not impossible that we will have a request for a very modest increase in tuition this year. It's not impossible that we'll have some fee request, but I don't intend to make, for example, I'm not going to request a 10 or 15% increase in tuition fees. Yes. He's bringing them. Let's take one more question. Travis, I know you said one more, but. No, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. So I just have a question. You mentioned that we are the football team of OCCC, and so my question is about the morale. So when stuff starts happening, do we have something in place to help the morale of the faculty and staff after cuts have been made that are, we're not able to control?
How can this financial situation not adversely affect morale? I mean, it affects my morale, and I know it has to affect other people as well. So the answer to your question is yes. There have been lots of recent discussions about what can we do to the extent we can that doesn't cost lots of money to try to increase morale of our faculty and staff. And I don't know if it worked, but last year I reinstated the faculty and staff picnic for, in prep and planning week. That had been done years and years and years ago, and it had stopped about 25 years ago. Now, does a picnic make everything okay? Of course it doesn't. I hope it says we care, I care, the board cares. But there are other things that we're currently considering to try to mitigate the effect on morale that our current financial situation has caused us, and we will do everything that we can to do that. But if you have some ideas, and this goes for everybody in the room, let me know. And I didn't say this earlier, but if you have suggestions or ideas, you don't have to go one of these listening sessions. That's all optional. But you can come see me. I have a policy in my office that any faculty member or staff member can see me if they want to. Now, it might be at a time that's inconvenient for you because we might have to do it later, real early, but I will take time to see anyone who really wants to see me. You can call me on the phone. You can send me an email. But if you have some ideas, Julia, about what we could do to increase morale, I would really be interested in hearing them. Let's do one more. I know I said you said it was all, but let's do.
Thank you, President Stewart. I just had a quick question about perhaps consolidating divisions. At one point in time, we had fewer divisions than we do now. And is there any possibility of consolidating some low graduating divisions, bringing them back together? And would that then put deans or administrators onto the table as to maybe a reduction in their positions?
Yeah. As you recall, last year we combined business and IT. Now, business and IT used to be business and IT, but it was bifurcated a few years ago. And no faculty lost a position because of that, but we had two deans, and we went to one dean. Now we had a vacancy in one of the deans. So, if we combine another division, we're not going to have two deans for the same division. So it would mean that there would be one less dean's position available. It would be more difficult to answer the questions about the low enrollment programs if we have I haven't really thought about combining two low enrollment programs because the programs can be so different. But if there's a way to combine a program, we'd certainly look at that as an efficiency that was necessary. But there is a possibility of further combination of a couple of current divisions. Oh, we also science and math last year. Max, I'm sorry. Dr. Max Simmons is the dean of the new combined division, as he was before we separated, right, Max? So, kind of back to the future. Yes, Gray. I knew if I said the name of a movie, Gray would ask a question.
Won't be a very popular question, but have you ever thought about charging for parking? Every school around, all universities.
If you couldn't hear Gray, his question was, have you ever thought about charging for parking? The answer is we've thought about it. You kind of sound like John Boyd, and John watches our money. Gray, we've thought about it and have chosen not to do it. It's another burden on our students, and I know we have the best deal in town when it comes to parking. But you know, when surveys, students actually criticize our parking situation almost as much as food service, but not quite. And I wish they could go to OU just for a semester and then come back, because at OU you have to pay for a parking decal. Now this parking decal doesn't mean you can park. It gives you the right to look for a parking space, not get one, but just be able to look for it. So we really do have we have adequate free parking, and I'm not saying we would never change that, because that's not necessarily true, but it's been, I think, one of the things that set us apart over the years, and I'm, you know, it's like these choices I talked about. There's charging students parking is a great choice as far as revenue raising, but I also think about students like I used to be with no money, and that extra $20 or whatever we'd charge is not insignificant to them. So it's really balancing between budgetary needs and how much our students should be asked to pay. And we do have, John, we have a portion of our student activity fee that goes to parking, don't we? Or we used to, I know.
Still do.
Yeah, so students, by paying a fee, already help pay for repair of parking lots and so on. But it would raise more revenue, for sure.
You can have a preferred parking area.
If you couldn't hear Gray, he said we could have a preferred parking area, and those students who chose to pay could park there, and those that didn't could not. And yes, we could, and I would hear about that a lot, Gray. But you're right. I mean, those are not. I'm not trying to belittle your question, because we have had serious discussions. John and I, in particular, have had serious discussions about charging for parking. We have, and it is a possibility. I hesitate to say that because I'm afraid that tomorrow there will be the rumor that I have said we're going to start charging students for parking, when I'm really doubt if we will, but it's on the table. It's on the table. Is that Kathy? Kathy, somebody take her. I know we said one more question, Travis, but let's do one more. And we'll do this one and one more.
And you were very clear about one more question 10 questions ago. Sorry.
That's okay.
My question for you, President Stewart, do you see any movement and action? What's happening to us is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening for Common Ed, and it's happening statewide. Do you see any movement at the Capitol in a positive direction? Do you see any action at the Capitol? And what are any perceptions that you could share with us about a state perspective of what's happening?
Well, I'll answer really your question. I'll answer in two parts. I do see some, in my opinion, some improvement in the quality of some of our new legislators. I'm not going to talk about the people they replaced, but I'll just talk about them. There are some new, both Democrats and Republicans, some new legislators that seem to get it. They seem to care more than maybe some of their predecessors. They seem to understand that this state is being devastated by these budget cuts. And folks, it's not just us. It's Common Ed. You may be aware that Michael Thompson, the Director of Public Safety, has imposed, except in cases of emergencies, a restriction on highway patrol troopers. Except for emergencies, they can only drive their cars 100 miles a day. That makes us all less safe. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I literally don't know how we keep our prisons open with what's their funding level's been. What we're doing in mental health is just criminal almost. And I could go on and on and on. So it's not just higher ed. It's not just Common Ed. It's Oklahoma government that is suffering under this no new revenue mantra for any reason, for any purpose. I'm going to give you an elongated answer to your question, Kathy, but for example, the cigarette tax, $1.50 a pack. It's the only tax that may have a reasonable chance of passing. We're not going to get any of the money. It's going to go to health to offset some of the Medicare federal matching money. Desperately needed. But here's something to think about. We know, we don't have to guess, we know when the tax on cigarettes is increased. We know teenage smoking is reduced. We know that. So, and you're looking at a former smoker like 35 years ago. To me, that's good policy, even if we didn't need the money. Well, if you're a smoker, you don't like what I just said, but I'm sorry. But even a tax like that is problematical. There's a motor fuel tax that's maybe got some legs to it, maybe, but by law, if it passes, it's got to go to transportation. We won't get any of it. So while I am encouraged about the quality of some of the new legislators, they seem smart, they seem interested, they seem caring, they seem engaged, more so than some of their predecessors. So that part's encouraging a little. But it reminds me of a conversation that I had earlier this legislative session with a person who's a really good friend of mine, personal friend. I've known him a long time. And he is now in a position of leadership in the legislature. And he was telling me how much he loves OCCC, likes me, doing a great job, students are wonderful, and it's just a great institution, and man, I support you. And I support all of higher ed, he said. And I said to him, everything you say, I believe. I believe you when you say that you're for us and you support us. But I said, at some point, you've got to do more than talk. At some point, you've got to go vote for something. And you've got to go vote for something that might get you an opponent in the next election. But I believe him. He is a great friend, and he has been a supporter. He's helped us on some gun bills behind the scenes that not many people know about, and he's helped. So I believe him. But I said, at some point, you got to go vote for something that matters. And even Governor Fallon, who has been an opponent of any tax increases all of her time in office, this year, Governor Fallon proposed a wide range of tax, not a new tax, but the sales tax would be applied to many more goods and services. And particularly the House Republican caucus, for the most part, let her know that was dead on arrival. The legislature may finally vote to end this giveaway to the wind industry that's taking tens of millions of dollars a year from tax collections through tax credits. But even if it passes this year, it won't save us any money until 2028 because of the obligations that have already been made. So that's not the long-term answer. So Kathy, on the one hand, I'm encouraged just generally by some of the quality I see in some of the new members. They at least seem to care. They at least seem to be engaged in discussions that matter, not on all these issues on the periphery that they get involved in so much. To give you an example, there was a bill in the legislature, I attended the committee hearing, there was a bill in the legislature that would have made it a crime for people at this college, like our Board of Regents, to pass a resolution opposing guns on campus. And we printed on college paper, and then I would be a criminal if I took it out and distributed it in the legislature. The Student Leadership Council votes for a resolution, and they print this on college paper. They've committed a crime if they are opposed to guns on campus. However, if they pass a resolution in favor of guns on campus, that's not a crime. Now, the courts would declare that bill unconstitutional in about 1 minute. But you know, it passed the committee. It was 7-6. It passed the committee. Now, it's since been killed. But it's those kinds of really on the edge of anything that makes a difference that the legislature is spending a lot of time on. It seems like more and more time with those kinds of things. And the focus ought to be on this state is coming apart in terms of services to its people. And we ought to be focusing on that, not just in higher ed, but in the statewide. So I feel some level of hope that these new legislators, as they get more experience and more seniority, and they'll be in positions of responsibility with committee chairmanships, that they will do a better job. But at some point, we have to recognize as a state that our tax base has been shredded, and we've got to replace it. And that's going to take some votes. And as you know, in order to pass any kind of tax increase because of a constitutional amendment, it takes 3/4 vote in the Senate and the House. That's very difficult to get. It takes 76 votes in the House and 36 votes in the Senate, and that's tough. But as a state, we've got to do it, or we're going to be, we're just going to be hanging on by a thread all the time. But at Oklahoma City Community College, we are going to move forward, and we are going to do it with or without more state support. We are going to develop a plan that moves us forward, and then we're going to execute that plan. Any others? I want to thank you again for being here. Oh, I'm sorry, Marianne, I didn't see your hand. Travis, let's do one more. And this, I promise, I know you all are getting probably restless, but.
I do have a question, and I'm going to take it from state to federal level. So there have been several articles that have been published by Higher Ed Today and a few other creditable sources talking about future and possible cuts to Pell Grants, which we know a large percentage of our students receive. And that's concerning to me when I think about increases tuition and fees and how our students will be able to pay their bills and the work that we need to do in our foundation to provide more scholarships. So as we're preparing our budget moving forward, are we thinking also about those possible cuts that could come down the road?
Yeah, it's a great question. You all know we've had a change of administration in Washington. I think the president's proposal is going to be difficult for our students. I was in Washington in February, and I had the opportunity to hear the new Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, speak. And she didn't offer any information, and she refused to take questions from anybody. So, Marianne, we are not going to base any of our state budgets on whether we think the federal government is going to increase or decrease or leave Pell alone. One of the things that I will say gives me some hope about that is Congressman Tom Cole from Norman is the chair of the subcommittee that handles all federal aid to education. And years ago, when President George W. Bush was going to try to end the TRIO program, Congressman Cole almost single-handedly stopped that. I visit with him frequently. I think he really cares about the less fortunate and people who need financial assistance to go to college. And I have a lot of confidence in his fairness and judgment. So I think that's an advantage that we have. But there's going to be enormous political pressure to reduce federal expenditures as promised by the president in his campaign. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but it really isn't going to really impact our budget planning this year. Thank you all for coming. Please contact me if you have anything you want to say, anything you want to ask. Okay, thanks.